I didn't come back for the reception or the rehearsed smiles. I came back because my brother's fiancée deserved to know the truth before she signed her name next to his. And I came back because my mother finally said the quiet part out loud, right in front of everyone she'd spent 30 years trying to impress. She looked at me across the foyer of that Oakville event hall, took in my suit, my badge, my posture, and said, loud enough for the nearest two tables to hear, "Why would a government bureaucrat show up to a family celebration uninvited?" Polite laughter, the kind that fills space when no one knows what else to do. My father looked at the floor. My brother's fiancée, Claire, went still beside him. And Marcus, my brother's business partner and the man whose entire licensing application currently sat inside a federal review file that bore my name, went the color of old snow. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me like he'd just understood something that changed the architecture of his afternoon. Then my brother stepped forward and said, "She needs to leave." And Marcus grabbed his arm and said 3 words in a voice no one in that room was prepared for. "Don't say anything." You can't understand that moment without understanding what came before it. And what came before it started at a kitchen table in Mississauga, with a piece of paper I'd worked for, and a mother who couldn't be bothered to unfold it. I was 20 when I got accepted into the criminology and law program at the University of Toronto, full offer. I'd spent 2 years at a community college keeping my GPA near perfect, specifically because I knew my parents wouldn't pay. My father had said as much when I was 17. University is for people who have a plan. He'd said it while writing a check for my brother's hockey registration fee without flinching. I had a plan. I laid it out on that kitchen table the same way I'd laid everything out my whole life, carefully, clearly, with evidence. Acceptance letter, tuition breakdown, OSAP assessment. The gap I needed covered. $11,000 for the first year. My mother was making tea. She didn't turn around. "You should look into more loans," she said. "That's what they're there for." I said I'd already maxed what I qualified for as a dependent. She turned then, leaning against the counter with her mug, and looked at the papers the way you look at a flyer someone handed you outside a grocery store. "You'll figure it out. That's growing up." My father was in the living room. I raised my voice just enough. "Dad?" He appeared in the doorway. He had the expression he always wore when my mother had already decided something careful, slightly apologetic, completely useless. "Your mother's right," he said. "We can't take on that kind of debt right now." 1 week later, my brother needed new equipment for his AAA hockey season. Helmet, skates, a composite stick that cost more than my first semester's book list. I watched my father pull out the same credit card he'd told me they couldn't use. Nobody said anything about debt that time. That's the thing about favoritism in a family like mine. It was never announced. It was demonstrated, quietly, consistently, in receipts and silences and the specific warmth reserved for one child and not the other. My brother was the investment. I was the overhead. I tried anyway. I deferred my U of T offer and kept working. Nights at a call center, weekends at a cafe in Brampton that smelled like burnt milk and broken Wi-Fi. I applied for every external bursary I could find. I saved with the specific discipline of someone who knows no safety net exists. By the following September, I had enough for 1 year if I was careful. I was careful. I was more than careful. I was invisible in my own life, eating rice and frozen vegetables, wearing the same 3 work outfits on rotation, choosing the cold walk over the TTC fare when the distance was under 40 minutes. Halfway through 2nd year, my OSAP got flagged. A reassessment triggered by a parental income form that had been submitted without my knowledge listing both my parents as financially non-contributing, which reclassified my application and reduced my grant by 60%. The flag noted a discrepancy. A previous year's contribution statement had claimed partial support that didn't match tax records. I didn't understand the full implications then. I just knew my funding had dropped and I had 3 weeks to cover the shortfall or lose my enrollment. I went back to that kitchen. My mother listened to approximately 45 seconds of my explanation before interrupting. "We've already discussed this. We support you by not charging you rent," I said, very quietly. "You filed paperwork with the province saying you contribute to my education." She set down her mug. "I don't know what you're talking about." My father didn't come to the doorway this time. That night I sat on the edge of my bed in the room I'd grown up in and felt something go quiet inside me. Not numb. Not angry. Quiet in the way a decision feels quiet when you've finally stopped arguing with it. I called my aunt in Ottawa the next morning. She let me sleep on her couch for a week while I sorted the paperwork. I filed an appeal with the provincial office. I documented everything, and I left. Not dramatically. I packed 2 bags and a box of books while my mother was at her book club and my father was watching the game. I left a note that said I'd be in touch when I had a stable address. My mother texted me 4 days later. "I hope you're satisfied with yourself." I didn't respond. My aunt helped me find a subsidized room near Carleton. I transferred, rerouted, rebuilt. I finished my degree in criminology. Then I did something that surprised even me. I applied for a position with the federal government's Regulatory Compliance Division, the branch that handles licensing reviews, professional conduct investigations, and financial suitability assessments for federally regulated industries. I got the position. I was 26 and I was very good at reading paperwork for what it didn't say. The work wasn't glamorous. People imagine federal investigators carry something theatrical, dramatic raids, courtroom confrontations. The reality is quieter and considerably more powerful. I reviewed files. I wrote assessments. I made recommendations that could approve a business license or suspend one indefinitely. I sat inside a process that most people never knew existed until it touched them. My mother called for the first time 3 years after I left. Her voice had that particular warmth she used when she needed something, the kind that felt like a hand on your shoulder but was actually a hand in your pocket. "We're so proud of how you've done," she said. I waited. "Your brother's having a rough patch. His restaurant venture, there were some unexpected costs." There it was. I said I couldn't help. She said that's not what family does. I said I had a work call in 5 minutes. She said I'd always been selfish. I ended the call and sat with the feeling for a long time, which turned out to be much smaller than I'd expected. Distance had clarified things. I wasn't carrying grief anymore. I was carrying context. By year 7, I'd moved up. My division handled increasingly complex files, multi-party reviews, cross-jurisdictional compliance audits, cases where a single regulatory hold could affect a business worth several $1,000,000. My supervisor, Director Beaumont, had a way of explaining the weight of the role that stayed with me. "You're not deciding whether someone deserves success," she told me once. "You're deciding whether they've been honest about how they got there." I'd become, apparently, very reliable on that question. The wedding invitation arrived on a Tuesday. Heavy cardstock, the kind that signals money or the performance of it. My brother's name. A woman named Claire Tremblay, whom I'd never met. A venue in Oakville. My parents' names printed at the bottom as hosts. I almost recycled it. Then I saw the name listed as the wedding's co-host and business co-sponsor, Marcus Aldridge. I knew that name. I knew it from a file that had crossed my desk 6 weeks earlier. Marcus Aldridge, 41, applying for a federal small business certification tied to an investment vehicle he and my brother were co-developing. The application had passed initial screening. It was currently in my division's secondary review queue. The reason it had stalled, an unresolved discrepancy in the financial history section. Nothing criminal on its face. But in regulatory language, unresolved discrepancy means someone provided information that doesn't align with available records. And until that's reconciled, the application cannot move forward. My brother's business partner, whose certification I was part of reviewing. I sat with that for a long time. The professional requirement was clear. I flagged the conflict of interest to Director Beaumont the same afternoon. She initiated a formal separation. My name was removed from the review chain. A colleague in a parallel unit took over. The process was clean, documented, and completely standard. But I was still invited to a wedding. I thought about not going. Then I thought about Claire Tremblay, who had no idea that the business her future husband was co-building with my brother was currently under regulatory review, who had no idea that her future in-laws had a daughter who worked in federal compliance, who was about to link her financial life to a situation she hadn't been told the full shape of. I RSVP'd yes. The drive to Oakville on a gray October Saturday felt like the closing of a long loop. I wore a dark blazer, my federal ID clipped inside my jacket. No medals, no performance. I wasn't there to intimidate anyone. I was there because someone in that building deserved accurate information before making a permanent decision. I arrived during cocktail hour. The hall was tall-ceilinged, warmly lit, the kind of venue that costs enough to say something without technically saying it. I recognized my father near the bar, immediately older, slower, holding his drink with both hands like it was keeping him upright. My brother was across the room, laughing with a group I didn't recognize. My mother was near the entrance, talking to someone in a floral dress, and she saw me at almost the same moment I saw her. Her expression didn't open. It closed. "Well," she said, moving toward me with the specific efficiency of someone containing a situation. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Hello," I said. She looked at my clothes, then at my face, then at the badge outline visible through my jacket, and something shifted in her expression, not softness, calculation. "You look tired," she said. Behind her, Claire approached, hand extended, smile genuine and slightly uncertain. "You must be, I've heard so little. I'm sorry you're Nathan's sister?" "I am," I said. "Congratulations." Then my mother, stepping closer, voice carrying just enough, said it. "Why would a government bureaucrat show up to a family celebration uninvited?" The laughter that followed was scattered, uncomfortable. A few heads turned. My father found the floor with his eyes. Claire's smile held, but just barely. And Marcus Aldridge, who had been standing 12 feet away with a glass of sparkling water, went pale so fast the color left his face the way it leaves a document when you erase it completely, instantly, without trace. He recognized me, not as Nathan's estranged sister, as the name on the pre-review memo he'd been waiting on for 6 weeks. His glass didn't slip. He was too controlled for that, but he set it down very carefully on the nearest table. And when he looked at my mother, there was something in his expression that had nothing to do with the joke she'd just made and everything to do with the specific fear of a person who suddenly understands the room they're in. He said, quietly but clearly, "Don't say anything." My brother's face moved through confusion into irritation. "Why are you here? You weren't supposed to." "Nathan," Marcus said, with a steadiness that stopped him. "Stop talking." The silence that followed was the kind that makes a catered room feel very small. Claire looked between all three of them. "What is happening?" Marcus looked at me. His voice was careful, professional. The voice of a man who worked in regulated industries and had just understood exactly what kind of situation he was standing in. "You're on the Aldridge-McKinnon file." "I was," I said. "I'm not anymore." Something shifted in his posture relief, immediately complicated by the next logical question. "Why are you here?" he asked. "My brother is getting married," I said. "And there are some things Claire should know." My mother's voice sharpened. "Absolutely not. Whatever bureaucratic nonsense you've decided to make into a scene..." "Mom!" I looked at her without heat. "I'm not here about the file. I was there about something older than that. And the file, it turned out, was only part of what needed to be said." We moved to a small room off the main hall. The coordinator found us a side lounge with upholstered chairs and a table, the kind of room meant for quiet family moments before ceremonies. It turned out to be exactly right. Marcus sat across from me. Claire sat beside my brother, her hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone listening very hard. My parents stood near the door. My mother's arms were crossed. My father hadn't said a word. Marcus spoke first. "When I saw your name on the pre-review, I should have disclosed the connection immediately." "You should have," I said. "You didn't, which is its own issue. But that's between you and the file." Claire said, "What file? What review?" My brother shifted. "It's a certification thing. It's fine, it's being handled." "It's not fine," Marcus said quietly. He looked at Claire directly, with the expression of a man choosing discomfort over delay. "The application for our business certification is under a secondary review. It flagged because of a discrepancy in my financial disclosure. It's not criminal, but it's real, and it's not resolved." Claire stared at him. "You didn't tell me. I didn't want to worry you before the wedding." "That's not your decision to make about my life," she said. He didn't argue. My mother, who had been building pressure behind her crossed arms for the past 3 minutes, finally released it. "This is completely inappropriate. You're using a government position to insert yourself into a family you walked away from." "I walked away," I said, "because you filed false documentation with the Ontario government." The room went still. My father's head came up. I opened my bag. I'd brought the documents not as a weapon, I want to be clear about that, but because I'd learned a long time ago that truth without evidence is just a claim, and claims against people like my mother disappear the moment she leaves the room. I placed 2 documents on the table. My original OSAP file, and a copy of the parental income verification form my parents had submitted during my second year listing themselves as financially non-contributing, which was accurate, but which also contained a line about prior year partial support that had been checked yes, a claim that triggered a reassessment that cost me 60% of my grant. The yes was my father's handwriting. The partial support they'd claimed? The subsidized rent my mother had mentioned the last time I'd asked for help. They'd retroactively listed it as an education contribution to qualify for a lower parental assessment threshold, which reduced their obligation on paper while simultaneously reducing my entitlement. It wasn't sophisticated. It was the kind of thing that happens in families who understand bureaucratic systems just well enough to manipulate them and not quite well enough to understand the paper trail they leave. My father looked at the form for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I didn't understand what I was signing." My mother said, "That's ancient history." Marcus looked at the documents and said, with the careful tone of someone in a regulated industry who has just seen something they can't unsee, "This could constitute benefit fraud." My mother's voice rose. "Don't be absurd." "It's not absurd," he said. "Misrepresenting a financial contribution to access a lower parental income bracket in a provincial student aid calculation, that's a category of misrepresentation that provinces have prosecuted." Claire looked at my parents. "Did you do this?" My father opened his mouth. My mother answered first. "We did what we had to do." Claire turned to my brother. He was looking at the table. I said gently, "Because I meant it genuinely. I'm not here to prosecute anyone. I'm here because I spent 9 years carrying a version of this story that made me the person who quit, who couldn't handle it, who wasn't worth the investment." I looked at Claire. I wanted someone in this room to know the actual version before they built their life inside it. Claire nodded slowly. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was even. "Thank you." My brother said, "You could have just called." "I called," I said, "for the first 2 years." He had no answer for that. My mother began to say something. My father put his hand on her arm gently, the first time I'd ever seen him interrupt her, and said, "Don't." She looked at him. He didn't look away. Something passed between them that I hadn't witnessed before. I don't know what it meant for them. I only know it made him look more like a person than I'd seen in a long time. Marcus asked me, before we all dispersed back into whatever was left of that afternoon, whether my removal from the file had been properly documented. I told him it had been initiated the same day I received the invitation. He exhaled. "You protected the integrity of the process." "That's my job," I said. "You didn't have to come today." "No," I agreed. But Claire did nothing wrong, and she was about to make permanent decisions without complete information. That wasn't fair. He nodded, then said, with a quietness that felt sincere, "Your family doesn't deserve you." I told him that wasn't really the point anymore. The wedding didn't happen that day. Claire asked for a postponement. My brother didn't fight it. The guests were told there was a family matter, which was true, technically, though perhaps not in the way they imagined. Marcus's certification discrepancy was eventually resolved. It turned out to be a clerical error in how a prior business dissolution had been recorded, the kind of thing that looks worse than it is and takes 6 months to clarify. His file moved forward without my involvement. My parents retained a lawyer. My mother framed the OSAP situation as a misunderstanding, which it partially was. My father genuinely didn't understand the implications of what he'd signed. But partial misunderstanding, applied to a provincial benefits form, is still a misrepresentation, and the provincial office that handles those reviews has its own audit process that operates entirely independent of me. I didn't initiate anything. I didn't have to. My father called me 2 months later. He asked if we could meet. I chose a Tim Hortons on the highway between our 2 cities because I wanted neutral ground and familiar awkwardness and coffee that doesn't try to be something it isn't. He looked older. He looked like a man who'd spent several weeks understanding the actual shape of something he'd spent years not looking at directly. "I thought I was staying out of it," he said. "Between you and your mother." I told myself it wasn't my place. I said, "Your place was being my parent." He nodded. He didn't flinch from it, which surprised me. "I signed things I didn't read properly," he said. "That's true, but I also looked away from things I understood well enough. That's worse." I let that sit. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I don't think I've earned that conversation yet." I told him that was the right instinct. He cried, briefly, into his coffee. A 63-year-old man in a Timmy's off the 401, finally having the version of the conversation that should have happened in a Mississauga kitchen 11 years earlier. I didn't cry. Not because I'd stopped feeling it, but because I'd already done that part, alone, in an Ottawa apartment with bad heating and a borrowed lamp. My mother never called. I didn't expect her to. Claire and my brother did get married 6 months later, in a much smaller ceremony. A restaurant in Hamilton with 12 people and no event coordinator. She told me afterward that the postponement had been the most clarifying thing that had ever happened to her, which I believed. She was the kind of person who wanted the accurate version of things, and she'd accidentally joined a family that had been running on a curated one for decades. We speak now, Claire and I. Not often. But honestly, that's more than I had before, and more than I'd expected to earn. My brother and I are slower. There's affection in there, buried under years of a dynamic we were both shaped by, neither of us fully at fault for, and neither of us fully without responsibility for. We don't pretend otherwise. Some days that feels like progress. People ask me whether it was worth it, whether going back started something that couldn't be controlled, whether the investigation and the postponement and the family legal fees were a kind of collateral damage I should have considered before walking into that hall in Oakville. I've thought about it carefully, the way I think about all assessments. I didn't go back to burn anything down. I went back because a woman I'd never met was about to make permanent decisions inside a story she'd only been given the approved version of. I went back because I had spent 9 years building a life on the principle that accurate information is the foundation of everything, every review, every recommendation, every decision that actually holds. And I'd watched my own foundation get falsified by 2 people who thought paperwork was invisible. Truth, I've learned, is not a weapon you aim. It's a standard you maintain. And when you maintain it long enough, consistently enough, without drama and without apology, eventually the things built on something less stable start to show the difference. I kept going to work. I kept writing my assessments. I kept recommending outcomes based on evidence rather than preference. In a building full of people making consequential decisions about other people's professional lives, I understood more than most of my colleagues would ever have reason to what it cost when someone in that chain had a reason not to be impartial. My parents taught me that lesson. They just didn't intend to. If this story stayed with you, if you recognize something in it, maybe a kitchen table, maybe a form that didn't add up, maybe a silence that lasted longer than it should have, sit with that for a moment. Fairness isn't guaranteed by love. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones least equipped to give it. And sometimes the only thing you can do is build a life on a standard they couldn't meet, and let that be enough. If you believe stories like this one matter, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to stay for more honesty, more consequence, more hard-earned quiet, we'll be here.